Let's rewind to the early 2000s. There was a canceled project titled Batman vs. Superman Asylum. Warner Brothers had the idea for a Batman vs. Superman movie for a while. A decade later, Warner Brothers announced that Zack Snyder and David Goyer were going to make a sequel to Man of Steel, and it would feature Batman, giving us the first ever theatrical meeting between the two beloved DC icons. Welcome to the summer of Superman, and hopefully you can join me on this journey through Superman's theatrical roller coaster ride. And while the theatrical roller coaster ride might end this weekend when I look at James Gunn's Superman, the summer of Superman is far from over, so stay tuned for some animation, video game, and weird-ass shit. But before we get to James Gunn's Superman this weekend, or tonight in my case, let's look at the Man of Steel follow-up, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. Zack Snyder and David Goyer would team up again to write Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. Christopher Nolan would stay on as an executive producer, and Snyder and Nolan had very briefly considered connecting Man of Steel to the Dark Knight trilogy. However, it was a brief discussion as both agreed that it'd be best to not do that. David Goyer, though, was also very busy with a bunch of other projects at the time, so Chris Terrio was brought on to help with rewrites. Terrio took inspiration from the Dark Knight trilogy as well as Umberto Eco's 1976 essay, The Myth of Superman, and a W.H. Auden poem, Muse des Beaux-Arts. I know Italian, but my French sucks. And he leans very heavily into the gods among men approach and mentality to this DCEU, and particularly to BVS. And the need to create a cinematic universe to compete with the MCU led what was originally going to be a Man of Steel sequel into becoming a sort of backdoor pilot for a Justice League film. Lastly, Hans Zimmer and Junkie XL would both team up to compile the musical score for Batman vs. Superman, which is actually a really fucking great score, if I say so myself. Moving on to the casting, the Man of Steel cast mostly returns with Amy Adams, Laurence Fishburne, Kevin Costner, Diane Lane, and obviously Henry Cavill as Superman. On the Batman side of things, Jeremy Irons was cast as Alfred, and Zack Snyder took inspiration from the Dark Knight Returns comic book storyline, which meant that BVS needed an older and more emotionally layered Batman. And Ben Affleck was originally against the idea of playing Batman since he didn't initially feel like he fit the role, but was eventually convinced by Zack Snyder when he was shown the concept and how different it was from all the other Batman projects we have seen in the past. However, the likes of Ryan Gosling, Joe Manganiello, and others were considered for the role, as well as a little-known actor named Jason Momoa auditioned for the role of Batman, but got the part of Aquaman. Gal Gadot was eventually cast as Wonder Woman, and Jesse Eisenberg was cast as Lex Luthor. Ultimately, the majority of the cast I genuinely love. None of my issues with the film revolve around performances. Personally, as I mentioned in my Man of Steel video, I don't think Amy Adams is a great fit for Lois Lane. I think she gives amazing performances because she's an amazing actress, but she never feels like she fits the role, in my opinion. Secondly, Jesse Eisenberg also is a great actor and performs the role very well as the role is written. However, this Lex Luthor is not written like Lex Luthor. His mannerisms, his speech patterns, none of it feels like Lex. So while I do think Jesse Eisenberg does a good performance with what he's given is not Lex Luthor, and so I do think he's miscast as Lex Luthor, but not necessarily miscast in the role as written. I don't like this Lex Luthor, but it's because of how he's written, not the performance. On to the story. The movie opens up at the Wayne funeral and then flashes forward to seeing the civilian point of view as well as the Bruce Wayne point of view of the Battle of Metropolis at the end of Man of Steel between Clark Kent, aka Superman, and General Zod. So at its core, BVS is a battle of philosophies between Superman and Batman, which is told and shown through Clark Kent's investigation into Batman. And during this investigation, you meanwhile get to see Batman investigating LexCorp and the White Portuguese, where in an attempt to steal files from LexCorp, he runs into Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman. Also, meanwhile, Superman is being debated about and even investigated by a congressional committee for acting on his own accords during events that concern national security. And Lex Luthor eventually smuggles a bomb into one of these congressional hearings to help the public opinion turn against Superman. Also, meanwhile, Batman has stolen kryptonite from LexCorp and has built a super suit so he can take on Superman. And after kidnapping Martha Kent, Lex Luthor forces Superman to kill Batman in an attempt to get these two heroes to eliminate each other so Lex Luthor no longer has to worry about them foiling his plans. This leads to the memeable moment of the movie where Superman yells, "Save Martha!" Which is coincidentally not just the name of his mother, Martha Kent, but it's also the name of Bruce Wayne's late mother, Martha Wayne. Which causes Batman to yell back, "Why did you say that name?" Until he realizes what's actually happening and that he's being manipulated by Lex Luthor. Now, a lot of people criticize this moment, and for as many issues as I have with this film that we'll get into a little later in this video, none of those issues are this. Because as someone whose mother has passed away, if I'm in the middle of battling someone and all of a sudden they say, "Save, insert my mother's name," it's gonna make me pause and question, why are they saying that? Why are they telling me to save my mother's name? Eventually, Batman goes on to save Martha Kent in an epic and great warehouse fight scene, which causes Lex to execute Plan B, and I'm not talking about pregnancy pills. He releases Doomsday onto the world by resurrecting the corpse of General Zod. This forces the Holy Trinity of DC, Batman, Superman, and eventually Wonder Woman to team up to defeat this monster called Doomsday, ultimately forcing Superman to sacrifice his own life to save the world. This perfectly leads into my personal review and thoughts. Half of this movie I think is actually pretty amazing. It's visually well shot and great to look at. There is a great Gods Among Us atmosphere that separates it from the 4-quadrant MCU movies that we were getting at the time. It explores relevant themes, but for as many positives as I have for this movie, there's just as many, if not more, negatives. Primarily, the third act of this movie ruins practically the whole thing for me. So the first Superman story that I ever read was the death of Superman. And this is a story that's very precious to me personally. And the third act of BVS is such a horrendous adaptation of that story that I just can't get on board with. So even though I love the overarching theme and I love Luthor's manipulative plan of getting Superman to fight Batman, I don't like his lines, his dialogue, or his mannerisms, but the overarching plan of the story I enjoy. It all falls apart when you turn Doomsday into a General Zod corpse abomination with a horrible creature design. At the time of the film's release, and even in retrospect, it was a horrible decision to kill Superman off in the second movie. You could have easily pretty much done the exact same story if you replace Doomsday with Amazo. It would make total sense because Luthor had files on other metahumans whose powers he could program into Mazo, making him a super indestructible being and android, which would cause Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman to team up, and you still get practically the same third act. If they had just done a Mazo and saved Doomsday for a later movie, I probably would at least give the Ultimate Edition a thumbs up. I will mention briefly that the Ultimate Edition is much better, however, it doesn't save the movie. That being said, I used to hate this movie with a passion, however, over the years, I've grown to tolerate it. I like Zack Snyder as a director. Watchmen is one of my favorite movies of all time. Man of Steel, I have certainly grown to love, even though I have some minor issues with it. And Zack Snyder's Justice League is also one of my favorite comic book movies of all time as well. BVS is just stuck in the middle of two movies that I genuinely love, so I think BVS deserves a flat line. It's a passable way to just get from point A to point B. Thanks for watching this video on Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section down below. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you can join the summer of Superman as we look at the brand new film this weekend, which I will be seeing tonight. Smash that like button if you enjoyed this video, and always stay super.